Thanks so much, everybody, for your attention today. Super happy to have the opportunity to give this talk and looking forward to an interesting conversation. So I'm David. I lead the scientific computing group within the newest institute inside the Allen umbrella. It's the Allen Institute for Neural Dynamics. And as a representative, the first representative talking, I'll just give you a brief overview of the types of things that we're working on. So we started about 2 years ago, I would say, maybe almost to the day. was when we launched. I'll just read to you our mission very quickly. We want to discover how the brain's neurons produce our emotions, memories, and actions. We think that good answers will be in terms of activity in defined neuron types, interacting across the whole brain and body. So, going back to previous conversations, we will be doing brain-wide recordings and possibly generating a very large amount of data. And which will require the development of next-generation neurotechnologies. And along the lines of all of the Allen Institute's history with open science, we're going to be sharing everything that we do widely in the open to facilitate science elsewhere, and of course, support the development of therapies for brain disorders. Now, to give you a sense for the kind of subgroups that are standing up within the Neural Dynamics Institute. We're making a very large concerted effort standing up a group of behavior scientists, largely looking at variants of foraging behaviors and how those can be analyzed to look into things like memory formation, decision making. We hope to get very good at doing brain-wide electrophysiology with neuropixels probes, which we obviously learned a lot about earlier today, many of you are familiar with. But we plan to be able to insert simultaneously 10 to 15 neuropixels probes and record from neurons all over the brain at the same time. There are many different optical physiology platforms, the rigs that we're building right now. Of course, standard mesoscope-like calcium 2-photon imaging, but of course also more exotic things I may discuss later. And this was kind of a surprise to me when I started at the Institute. We're also standing up a really large-scale effort around neural circuit mapping, which I'll show you a movie of right now. So this is data that was collected on what we call an exospim. That's short for expansion-assisted single-plane illumination microscopy. So it's a light sheet microscope that's being used to image, do optical sectioning, no physical sectioning, of whole mouse brains that have been cleared and expanded roughly threefold. And so by doing so, we're able to get roughly 200 nanometer isotropic resolution in terms of acquisition, and that lets us resolve individual axons, dendrites, in such a way that we hope it'll be relatively easy, he says, to extract out the neuron skeleton of all the neurons that are labeled within a mouse brain, and we'll do that labeling in the standard ways, either transgenically or virally. Anyway, so it makes for a really beautiful movie. But it also gives me a headache because this imagery, we're looking at one optical section to be clear, but an entire brain gets imaged over the course of roughly a day and is about 100 terabytes of data. And so we're going to be doing a lot of those, and I have to figure out what to do with it. That's one of my jobs. The next, so we're going to be doing all of this sort of anatomical mapping, very detailed anatomical mapping. We're doing that because we think it's critically important to have a detailed understanding of anatomy as a prior to all these activity models that people are fitting on top of behavior physiology data. And so, of course, we're looking at two examples here. On the left, calcium imaging from a mesoscope, and on the right, a single neuropixels representation of data from a single neuropixels probe. We've seen lots of these today. But we're going to be doing lots of other things too. So we'll be recording neuromodulator activity with a couple different types of fibrophotometry. We're going to be doing very detailed synaptic imaging. We'll be able to record individual synaptic events, as I mentioned before, various behavior experiments that will require us to do a very accurate estimation of pose, animal pose from many different views. So anyways, there's just like a lot going on. And so I say all of this not to like impress you, but more to just give you a sense for how approaching this new institute, I thought about our priorities for data science. And, to nobody's surprise, the first priority is that whatever we do, it needs to be able to handle a massive amount of data that's coming off of many different heterogeneous systems. So petabytes of data per month, and possibly even more critically, on metadata that's evolving constantly, right? So we're very much at the cutting edge of how we think about and use and develop language around behavior. And we have many, many scientists that are going to be able to influence and drive how we talk about these things. And that means that metadata needs to be able to change very quickly. Okay, another really important thing is that from the beginning we knew my team was going to be not the majority of the institute. As Carl likes to say, Carl Sabota is our executive director, just so it's clear. But it's clear from the beginning that this is a science-driven organization, which is very easy for data science to consume all of the air in the room when you're thinking about data problems at this scale. And it's like, okay, that's not what we're doing. And so that means, strategically, my team, we need to think of ourselves as enabling self-service, right? Scientists need to be able to do science without having an engineer paired with them. So that means scientists need to be able to build their own pipelines, their own workflows, and maybe we'll help guide, but needs to be a thing that they can do on their own with support. Another key theme you'll hear throughout this presentation is we want to focus on reproducibility. We want to do this better than it has been done in the past, which means, very briefly, that data, code, protocols, environments, everything has to be versioned and documented every time we deploy them. There's a lot to that statement. And then finally, sustainability, right? So this institute's going to be around for many years, and so we need a platform that will be able to support science throughout the duration of the life of the institute. Okay, so all of that, though, is to say it's sort of in support of the value of the Allen Institute writ large. We believe deeply in open science. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about our philosophy on open science now as well. Now, it's kind of funny because if you ask anybody what they think about open science, they will talk about a different thing, right? So open science is many things to many people. For some, it's data availability. For some, it's open source code. For some, it's licensing. So what I'm going to do now is just talk about sort of the big ticket items that we want to focus on as the Institute for Neural Dynamics. One is making data that is this large and this heterogeneous, accessible and useful in the fair sense. Right, so that means we're going to be working on tools to facilitate flexible use and reuse of the data that we collect. We need to kind of critically minimize the amount of large data movement that happens, right? So if we're collecting petabytes of data per month and we want other people to be able to work with it, it can't be the case that our strategy is to distribute it across the globe. That's simply inefficient, right? And also, it's probably I don't know, bold this even more, rich metadata is the foundation on which all of this data reuse is the foundational thing on which all data reuse sits, right? So nobody can work with data that you collect if you don't have rich human-readable and machine-readable metadata. Another important thing we want to do better than we've done in the past is we want to emphasize community and collaboration. What do I mean by that? I think in the past, people are used to interacting with the Allen Institute kind of as like a data producer, right? We produce these large-scale resources, and now here you go, work with them, and we're going to move on to the next atlasing effort, right? So that is not very collaborative. It's cool, but it's not very collaborative, and so we're interested in pushing our own envelope, so to speak, on engaging more with scientific community and how we share things with each other. And a big part of that sharing story is going to rely on cloud computing to, I think, nobody's surprise here. But it's part of the no data movement, and it's part of flexible reuse. We need to bring people to data rather than distribute data around the world, and the cloud is an enabling technology that supports that. And finally, we want to be intentional about how we think about inclusion. I think, we've done a study, folks at the Allen Institute have done a study to see, for some of our data sets, how are they being reused in our community? Who's publishing on them? And, I didn't include the chart, but if I show you, a Wordle of who are the people that are working with our data, it's all very large, well-funded universities, right? So the question that we ask ourselves regularly is, are there people we're missing, right? Are there people who are not interacting with the data and tools that we're producing simply because they lack access to physical resources that these university and these institutions have available to them? And again, cloud is enabling technology to bring people like that for whom it's just cost and access to physical resources that's a barrier. And that's something we can potentially do something about. Okay. To give you a diagrammatic version of our open science story, I think this is a picture of how we've done it in the past, right? Closed door, we develop research questions we want to go tackle as an institute or projects we want to go explore. We design experiments, we collect sometimes a lot of data, we analyze that data and we publish, and as part of the publication process, we kind of go back in time and clean everything up and say, here's all of the data and tools we used to produce this wonderful atlas, and here's some additional tools to make it easy for you to use it. But it's all kind of retrospective, and I think this is a model that's pretty standard across the field now. It's kind of funny saying that because like 15 years ago when I started, this was not even a conversation we could have had. So it's nice to see that we've all come this far and are more open to sharing than that we were in the past, but it's all retrospective. And there's a couple of things that I don't like about that. One, it creates a lot of producer-consumer relationships across the community. And two, it's a lot of work, right, to go back and clean everything up at the end of your analysis process, rather than doing it up front. If you do NWB file generation at the end, when you've written your paper, you basically have to rewrite all of your code, right? I'm sure others have experienced this. Okay, so we'd like to flip the script a little bit. Say we don't just want to do open science, we want to do science in the open, right? So we're moving that transparency dotted line box to the left a little bit. We want to, as much as we can, share the data that we collect at the time of acquisition, right? So there's a lot that goes into that, and we're not perfect at this right now, to be transparent, but that means that standards happen at the time of acquisition, right? We need to share NWB files as soon as they're acquired, and then we, along with anybody else, should be able to work on that data together, if we want to, in a public space. And so it's our sort of hypothesis that if we do this well, we'll foster an open and reproducible analysis ecosystem in which there's many members from the community working together, rather than sort of a bunch of very private research projects that then can talk to each other in publication form, right? The other thing I'm going to talk about is Jerome, who's sitting right there, is going to be talking, I think, just after me, about an attempt within our building to move that box, just to remove the transparent box entirely and do everything in the open, and that's through a really cool program called the OpenScope program. I won't steal his thunder, but looking forward to that talk. Hope you are as well. Hope Jerome is too. So let me talk about the infrastructure that we're standing up to make this possible. So starting on the left, this is what I call a cloud-first data strategy. So starting on the left, we do have a data center in our building, but we try to use it as little as possible. Its purpose for the Neurodynamics Institute is to collate metadata alongside collected primary data, and then upload to the public cloud, and maybe do some compression and file format transcoding on the way out. All that data will land in an open data bucket, so part of the registry of open data on AWS, the same program that AWS graciously sponsors for Dandy. And so we want it to be the case that anybody at any time can go poke into that bucket. We have good metadata there, and you'll be able to understand all the different data that's sitting there and work with it without a ton of our intervention, right? And so it's public, anybody can do that. And then, let's be honest, it's not really easy to browse files. So we'll be standing up a data catalog to help make it easier for people to search on key search terms, and we may build some dashboards that'll be public facing. Okay, but data sitting in cloud buckets is hard to work with, right? I think everybody who's tried to who has tried to do this recognizes that it's difficult. Buckets full of objects are not files, right? And so that means a lot of the standard tooling that people use to interact with data has to change or just breaks. So I spent a long time looking for a platform that was like compatible with scientific workflows and would lower the barrier to entry to working with data in the cloud. We came up with a platform that is pretty compelling called CodeOcean. I'm going to explain it to you more in detail later. We discovered, we didn't come up with. It enables interactive analysis in standard platforms that you're used to, like JupyterLab, RStudio, MATLAB, Visual Studio Code, but you get to work with files, not buckets and objects. And kind of critically, you can build environments and pipelines without writing any code, and I'll show you what that looks like. Everything that we do within our CodeOcean deployment we'll share publicly on GitHub, and it's a cool platform. We're not locked in any sense of the term, so anybody can take the stuff we put up on GitHub and run it on their own. Before I get to CodeOcean, which is probably one of the more interesting bits of this talk, I want to make a comment about how to organize data to facilitate reproducibility. I think something that I had to think really hard about, and it was sort of tricky. But so it's a rather obvious corollary, like if you want to work with something and be able to always reproduce your results, that means the thing that you're building off of can't change. Right? And so that affects like kind of deeply how you organize your files. That means, the top of your folder hierarchy has to be time, right? So the way that we are organizing that open data bucket is around the acquisition session. I'm showing you, and we call these data assets. It's basically just a logical group of files that is all the metadata and metadata that goes along with an acquisition session or a processing session. But if you organize this way, that means that anytime you do anything to data, you process it, you transform it, you compute features, it's just more data assets that never affect each other. And that's super important. If you have to go back, if ever you go back and touch the original files, that breaks anybody else's ability, your ability, your office mate's ability, or the community's ability to reproduce results that they're working on from day to day. So we took a lot of inspiration from BIDS for how we actually organize these things. It's basically primary data and subfolders broken up by modality, which BIDS calls data types, and then all these sidecar JSON files that are schematized, which I will talk about now. Those sidecar JSON files hold all of the metadata that we care deeply about, and the question is why are these and why aren't these an existing standard? It's because of all of the different types of data that we're planning to collect. There are many sort of micro standards across our ecosystem, but there's no data model that covers everything that we're planning to collect. I've got 2 minutes. So we're developing a schema. Again, this is a data model. It's not a database. It's not a file format. It's just a way to organize metadata so that we can have common definitions and organizations around terms that are useful. We talked to Satra about this, so we built it with Pydantic. Pydantic renders the JSON schema, which lets us programmatically generate data entry GUIs. One more couple slides. Oh man, I'm way behind. I'll skip this one. Pipelines are important. You have to be specific about how they're used. You can't just say I use Sui2P to process our data. That's like I won't say the meme out loud. And that's how we landed on CodeOcean. We needed a platform that would let scientists work reproducibly with data without having to train every single scientist in how to use Docker and Git and all of the, and Nextflow, right? If we have to train everybody to do all of these things, we're basically training scientists to be engineers, which I think is a waste of their talents. So CodeOcean is a platform that we think does this pretty well, very quickly. This is what it looks like to look at a capsule, which encapsulates the data, the code, and the environment that goes into an analysis in one convenient location. Critically, we've got an ability to define an environment. That's all the like pip conda packages, the base operating system. All of that gets encoded into a Docker file without you having to write Docker. All the DevOps of like deploying Docker images onto EC2 instances goes away. That just happens for you. You cannot work in a capsule without versioning your code and your environment, which is essential. And kind of critically, the platform scales. Because now we've done all of this work of making the environment and the code portable, you can put this on any machine at any scale and do any analysis at any scale you want to using any resource in cloud. We're building Nextflow pipelines using a nice GUI they have, so we don't have to learn how to write Nextflow, which is kind of a clunky language. All workflow description languages are clunky. Some are clunkier than others, but Nextflow is very popular, particularly in the transcriptomic space. We have a GUI for making these in a fully reproducible fashion that we can then run on premise if we need to, because we can take things out of the platform. All of these things give CodeOcean the unique ability to track provenance all through the platform. It just happens because it's tracking all of these things. So every single run, we're able to take a result asset, here spike sorted units from a particular eFIS session. We can take it all the way back to the primary data and see every transformation that we did to it. It's kind of a unique capability that I haven't seen anywhere else. Closing thoughts. I made it. We are deeply concerned about pushing the envelope on open science, and sort of this sort of pithy phrase, science in the open, comes from. We hope others can engage with us in this conversation. We think cloud is an enabling technology for collaboration. It allows us to move people to data rather than move large data around, which is hard. Immutability is really important. It's more important than I thought going into this, and so you have to be really careful with that. Even in your own labs, when you're organizing your files, you have to be careful with that. We like CodeOcean. We've been using it for a year now. Scales pretty well across all of our institute. And a final meta point that I'll make, metadata, pipelines, all of this stuff, this DevOps, right? If something is hard, even though it's important, people will do a bad job of it, right? They will make mistakes, or if they're not incentivized to do well, they'll make mistakes. And this is just like an existential problem that I think tooling needs to solve for us. So that's all.
All right. You have a question?
Yes. So how do you you mentioned that some of these are hard for scientists to get used to them. That's true because, you don't have the bandwidth. As scientists develop all these tools. So what's the right solution to, get through this and have something that is useful, is practical, it integrates well with all this like open science platforms, but it doesn't consume too much of the time of the scientist who's not trained to do this?
Yeah. I hope I was able to articulate that. For me, that's just a user interface problem with the tooling, right? And if every single tool that is essential for doing reproducible open science is yet another thing that somebody has to learn, then people aren't going to learn it, right? So that's where things like CodeOcean, it doesn't have to be CodeOcean, but things like CodeOcean have to exist so that we don't have to train scientists to do every single thing.